In 2003, two college friends and photography enthusiasts vanished without a trace while documenting Arizona's remote canyon systems for their travel blog. Melissa Morrison and Emma Brown had set out on what should have been a routine weekend trip to capture images of hidden cliff dwellings and ancient ruins, following tips from local guides about undiscovered archaeological sites. Their rental car was found abandoned at a remote trailhead, expensive camera equipment missing, with no sign of where they had gone. But 8 years later, experienced cave explorers mapping uncharted sections of the canyon system made a discovery that would reveal the shocking truth about what happened to the two young women. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The story begins in the autumn of 2003, when Melissa Morrison and Emma Brown were both 24 years old and recent graduates of Arizona State University. They had met during their sophomore year in a digital photography class and quickly bonded over their shared passion for capturing the American Southwest's hidden archaeological treasures. What started as a class project documenting local petroglyphs had evolved into something much more ambitious, a travel blog called Hidden Heritage that was gaining attention from adventure travel enthusiasts and amateur archaeologists across the country. Melissa, a journalism major with an eye for composition and storytelling, handled the writing and photo editing aspects of their collaboration. She was methodical in her approach, spending hours researching locations, cross-referencing historical maps with geological surveys, and reaching out to local experts for insider knowledge about lesser-known sites. Her sandy brown hair was usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she had a habit of adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses when she was deep in concentration, poring over topographical maps spread across her apartment's kitchen table. Emma brought the technical expertise and adventurous spirit that made their expeditions possible. A geology major with a minor in Native American studies, she understood the geological formations that created the perfect conditions for ancient cliff dwellings, and she could read the landscape in ways that helped them locate sites that hadn't been documented by mainstream archaeological surveys. Her curly red hair and quick smile masked a serious dedication to preserving and documenting these cultural treasures before they could be damaged by weather, vandalism, or worse. Their blog had started small, with posts about well-known sites, like Canyon de Chelly and Bandelier National Monument. But their readership grew as they began venturing into more remote locations. They developed a reputation for finding and photographing sites that weren't on any tourist maps, places where ancient peoples had built their homes and ceremonial spaces in seemingly impossible locations high on cliff faces or hidden in narrow canyon alcoves. The process of finding these sites required extensive research, physical stamina, and often a willingness to push beyond marked trails into wilderness areas where few modern visitors ever ventured. They would spend weeks preparing for each expedition, studying satellite images, consulting with local rangers and amateur archaeologists, and carefully planning their routes to minimize impact on fragile desert ecosystems. Their equipment was professional grade, funded by small advertising revenue from their blog and careful saving from their part-time jobs. Emma carried a Canon EOS 1D digital camera with several lenses, while Melissa preferred her film cameras, a Nikon F5 for action shots and a medium-format Mamiya for the detailed architectural photography that had become their signature. They both carried GPS units, though they often relied on Emma's ability to read the landscape and Melissa's skill with traditional map and compass navigation. The October 2003 trip that would be their last was planned around a tip they had received from a local guide named Ray Yazzie, a Navajo man who occasionally led small groups to documented archaeological sites, but had mentioned to them that he knew of other locations that weren't on any official surveys. Ray had been initially hesitant to share specific information, explaining that many Native American communities were protective of sacred sites and concerned about damage from increased visitation. However, after seeing their blog and the respectful way they documented and wrote about the sites they visited, he had agreed to provide them with general directions to an area where he believed they might find undocumented cliff dwellings. The location was in a remote section of canyon country, about 2 hours north of Flagstaff, accessible only by a rough dirt road that required four-wheel drive and careful navigation. Ray had described it as a side canyon system that branched off from a more well-known hiking area, but warned them that the terrain was challenging and that they should be prepared for technical climbing to reach some of the sites he suspected were hidden in the cliff faces. Melissa and Emma had spent 2 weeks preparing for the trip, studying topographical maps of the area, researching the geological history of the region, and reading everything they could find about the prehistoric peoples who had inhabited the canyon systems. They packed enough supplies for 3 days, planning to camp at the trailhead and make day hikes to explore different sections of the canyon system. On Friday, October 17, 2003, they loaded their gear into a rented Jeep Cherokee and made the drive north from Phoenix. The weather forecast was perfect for their plans, with clear skies and daytime temperatures in the 70s. They had called their families and friends to let them know their plans, as they always did before heading into remote areas, and had arranged to check in by cell phone on Sunday evening when they returned to an area with signal coverage. The drive took them through increasingly remote terrain, past small towns that seemed to exist mainly to serve the needs of ranchers and the occasional tourist heading to better-known destinations. The paved road gave way to graded dirt, and finally to a rough track that tested the limits of their rental vehicle's capabilities. Emma, who was driving, navigated carefully around washouts and rock slides, while Melissa consulted their maps and GPS unit to ensure they were following the correct route. They reached the trailhead late Friday afternoon, a small clearing beside a dry creek bed where the road simply ended. There was no formal parking area, no trail signs, no indication that anyone else had been there recently. The isolation was complete, with no buildings visible in any direction and only the sound of wind through the canyon walls to break the silence. Setting up their camp was a familiar ritual. They had perfected their system over dozens of previous trips, working together to establish their base camp with the efficiency that came from extensive practice. Emma erected their two-person tent while Melissa organized their photography equipment and prepared their evening meal. They had learned to travel light while still carrying everything they needed for safety and comfort during extended backcountry trips. As the sun set behind the canyon walls, painting the red sandstone formations in shades of orange and purple that seemed to glow from within, they reviewed their plans for the following day. Ray had provided them with compass bearings and landmarks to help them locate the most promising areas for undocumented sites, and they had identified several potential routes that would allow them to explore different sections of the canyon system. The landscape around them was classic Colorado Plateau country, with layered sedimentary rock formations that told the story of millions of years of geological history. Ancient seas had deposited the limestone and sandstone layers, while more recent volcanic activity had created the dramatic cliffs and mesas that made this region a perfect place for ancient peoples to build their cliff dwellings and defensive structures. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold, with frost covering their tent and the surrounding vegetation. They broke camp early, packing their photography equipment and enough supplies for a full day of exploration. The plan was to follow the main canyon for several miles, then branch off into a side canyon that Ray had described as the most likely location for undocumented sites. The hiking was challenging from the start. There was no maintained trail, and they had to navigate around boulder fields, through thick brush, and across creek beds that were dry now but showed evidence of the flash floods that periodically scoured these canyons. Emma's geological training proved invaluable as she read the rock formations and identified the types of alcoves and overhangs that ancient peoples would have found suitable for construction. They discovered their first site around midday, a small granary built into a shallow cave about 50 feet up a cliff face. The structure was remarkably well preserved, with original wooden beams still supporting walls built from carefully fitted stone blocks. Melissa spent nearly an hour photographing the site from different angles, while Emma documented the surrounding area and recorded GPS coordinates and detailed notes about the construction techniques and materials used. The find was exciting but not entirely unexpected. Ray had told them that this area was likely to contain multiple sites, and the granary was typical of the storage structures that prehistoric peoples built to protect their food supplies from animals and weather. What made it significant was its location, hidden in a part of the canyon system that wasn't included in any archaeological surveys they had been able to find. Their second discovery came later that afternoon, and it was far more impressive. Following a narrow ledge around a bend in the canyon wall, they found themselves looking across a deep alcove at a multi-room dwelling that appeared to be completely intact. The structure was built on multiple levels, with what appeared to be living spaces on the lower level and smaller rooms above that might have been used for storage or ceremonial purposes. The site was inaccessible from their current position, separated from them by a gap of about 20 feet and positioned on a ledge that was a good 30 feet above the canyon floor. Emma studied the cliff face through binoculars, identifying what might be an ancient access route that could be climbed with proper equipment, but they hadn't brought technical climbing gear on this trip. Instead, they spent the remainder of the afternoon documenting the site from their observation point, using telephoto lenses to capture detailed photographs of the construction and architectural features. The dwelling showed clear evidence of multiple building phases, with different stoneworking techniques visible in various sections, suggesting it had been occupied and modified over an extended period as the sun began to set. They made their way back to their base camp, excited by their discoveries, but also aware that they had only scratched the surface of what this canyon system might contain. Over their evening meal, they discussed plans for the following day, agreeing that they would focus on the more accessible sites and return on a future trip with climbing equipment to document the multi-room dwelling they had found. Their conversation that evening, as recorded in Melissa's journal, which was found later in their tent, revealed their growing sense that they had discovered something potentially significant. The sites they had found were well-preserved and appeared to be undocumented, representing exactly the kind of archaeological treasures that their blog was designed to bring to public attention while advocating for their protection and preservation. Emma had expressed particular excitement about the geological context of the sites, noting that the rock formations and alcove structures suggested the area might contain many more undocumented dwellings. The canyon system was extensive, with multiple side canyons and cliff faces that would have provided ideal conditions for prehistoric settlement. Melissa had focused on the photographic opportunities, already planning how she would process and present the images they had captured. She was particularly interested in the construction techniques they had observed, which showed a level of sophistication and adaptation to the challenging cliff face environment that would make for compelling storytelling in their blog posts. Neither of them had mentioned any concerns about other people in the area, and their journal entries and notes showed no indication that they had encountered anyone else during their first day of exploration. The canyon system appeared to be as isolated and uninhabited as Ray had suggested, with no signs of recent human activity other than the ancient sites they were documenting. Sunday morning brought another clear day, and they set out early for what they planned to be their final day of exploration before returning to Phoenix. They had identified several areas that looked promising for additional sites, including a section of the canyon where the rock formations suggested the presence of large alcoves that might shelter major dwelling complexes. Their base camp that morning showed no signs of the disturbance or struggle that investigators would later look for. Their tent remained properly secured, their remaining supplies organized and undisturbed. The only unusual element was that they had left behind some of their backup camera equipment, including film canisters and spare batteries, which Emma's parents would later say was uncharacteristic of their normally careful approach to equipment management. The route they planned to follow on Sunday would take them deeper into the canyon system, following what appeared to be an ancient access path that wound up the canyon wall to a series of ledges and alcoves. Emma had identified the path through binoculars the previous day, noting what appeared to be hand-and-toe holds carved into the rock face that suggested prehistoric peoples had used this route to reach elevated sites. The path was challenging, but not technically dangerous for experienced hikers like Melissa and Emma. They had both completed rock climbing classes and had developed the skills and confidence needed to navigate the kind of terrain common in canyon country. Their experience on dozens of previous expeditions had taught them to recognize and avoid truly dangerous situations while still being willing to tackle challenging routes to reach remarkable sites. Around midday on Sunday, October 19th, something happened that would change everything. The exact sequence of events remains unclear, but what is certain is that Melissa and Emma encountered something in that remote canyon that prevented them from returning to their base camp and ultimately cost them their lives. The first indication that something was wrong came Sunday evening when they failed to check in with their families as planned. Emma's parents, who lived in Scottsdale, expected to hear from her when she reached an area with cell phone coverage on the drive back to Phoenix. When they hadn't heard from her by late evening, they began calling her cell phone, but their calls went directly to voicemail. Melissa's parents, who lived in Tucson, had a similar experience. Their daughter was reliable about checking in after backcountry trips, and her failure to call was completely out of character. By Monday morning, when neither family had heard from the young women, they began to worry that something had gone wrong. The family's initial response was to contact local authorities, but they quickly discovered that the remote location of the canyon system complicated rescue efforts. The area fell within the jurisdiction of the Coconino County Sheriff's Office, but the rough terrain and complete lack of infrastructure made it difficult to organize an immediate search. Sheriff's deputies who drove to the trailhead on Monday afternoon found the abandoned rental car exactly where Melissa and Emma had left it. The vehicle was unlocked, and their base camp was still set up nearby, but there was no sign of the two women or their photography equipment. The deputies noted that the campsite appeared undisturbed, with no evidence of struggle or hasty departure. The search effort that followed was hampered by the challenging terrain and the vast area that needed to be covered. The canyon system extended for miles in multiple directions, with countless side canyons, alcoves, and cliff faces where someone could become lost or injured. Search and rescue teams used helicopters to survey the area from above, but the complex topography made it difficult to spot anything from the air. Ground search teams spent days combing the accessible areas of the canyon system, following the most likely routes that hikers might take and calling out the missing women's names. They found no trace of Melissa and Emma, no discarded equipment, no signs of where they might have gone or what might have happened to them. The investigation into their disappearance was thorough, but ultimately fruitless. Detectives interviewed everyone who had known about their plans, including Ray Yazzie, who had provided them with directions to the area. Ray was cooperative and helpful, providing detailed information about the sites he had told them about and the routes he had suggested they follow. The investigation revealed that Ray had been completely honest with the two women about the area's remoteness and challenges. He had given them accurate directions and appropriate warnings about the terrain, and he had no reason to wish them harm. His reputation in the local community was excellent, and he had been guiding visitors to archaeological sites for over 20 years without incident. Detectives also investigated the possibility that the women had encountered other people in the canyon system, but they found no evidence of any other visitors to the area around the time of their disappearance. The trailhead was so remote and difficult to reach that it rarely saw any traffic, and local law enforcement had no reports of other missing persons or unusual activity in the area. The official search was suspended after 2 weeks, though family members and volunteers continued to look for clues about what had happened. The case remained open, but without any evidence of foul play or clear indication of where the women had gone, there was little for investigators to pursue. In the months that followed, the families hired private investigators and organized their own search efforts. They consulted with expert trackers, brought in additional search dogs, and even hired helicopter pilots to survey areas that ground teams hadn't been able to reach. None of these efforts produced any useful leads. The disappearance attracted some media attention, particularly from publications focused on outdoor recreation and adventure travel. Melissa and Emma's blog had developed a following in the archaeological and adventure travel communities, and their disappearance was covered in several specialized magazines and websites. The coverage helped keep the case in the public eye and generated tips from people who claimed to have seen the women or their vehicle, but none of these leads proved credible. The vast majority of reported sightings were cases of mistaken identity, and the few that seemed potentially legitimate were investigated thoroughly without producing any useful information. As the first anniversary of their disappearance approached, the families held a memorial service and established a scholarship fund in Melissa and Emma's names to support students interested in archaeological research and documentation. The service was attended by hundreds of people, including classmates, professors, and readers of their blog who had been inspired by their work. The case gradually faded from public attention, though it remained active in the files of the Coconino County Sheriff's Office. Detectives periodically reviewed the evidence and followed up on occasional tips, but as the years passed, The investigation yielded no new information about what had happened to the two young women. The families never stopped looking for answers. Emma's parents, Robert and Patricia Brown, made annual trips to the canyon area, often accompanied by volunteer searchers who continued to hope that some trace of the missing women might be found. They became advocates for improved safety measures and communication capabilities in remote recreation areas, working with local authorities to install emergency communication equipment at trailheads and popular backcountry destinations. Melissa's parents, David and Linda Morrison, focused their efforts on preserving their daughter's photographic work and continuing the mission of the Hidden Heritage blog. They worked with archaeological organizations to ensure that the sites Melissa and Emma had documented would be properly protected and studied, turning their daughter's passion into a lasting legacy. The canyon system, where the women disappeared, remained largely uninvited during the years following their disappearance. The remote location and difficulty of access meant that few people ventured into the area, and the knowledge that two experienced hikers had vanished there without a trace deterred many potential visitors. Local authorities maintained the area as a search zone, with periodic patrols by sheriff's deputies and occasional organized search efforts by volunteer groups. The landscape remained unchanged, with the ancient cliff dwellings continuing their silent vigil over the desert canyons, holding their secrets as they had for centuries. The archaeological sites that Melissa and Emma had discovered and documented became part of an ongoing study by researchers from Northern Arizona University. Their photographs and notes provided valuable information about previously unknown prehistoric settlements, contributing to the broader understanding of how ancient peoples had adapted to life in the challenging desert environment. The research revealed that the canyon system had been continuously occupied for over 1,000 years, with evidence of multiple cultural groups who had built and modified the cliff dwellings over time. The sites showed sophisticated engineering and construction techniques, with complex water management systems and defensive features that demonstrated the inhabitants' deep understanding of the local environment. Dr. Sarah Chun, an archaeologist who led the university's research team, praised the quality of documentation that Melissa and Emma had provided. Their photographs captured architectural details and construction techniques that would have been difficult to document from ground level, and their notes showed a deep appreciation for the cultural significance of the sites they were studying. The research also revealed that the canyon system was more extensive than previously known, with multiple side canyons and cliff faces that likely contained additional undocumented sites. The challenging terrain and remote location meant that comprehensive archaeological survey work would require years of careful study and significant resources. As the investigation into Melissa and Emma's disappearance entered its third year, detectives began to consider the possibility that the case might never be solved. The complete absence of physical evidence and the lack of any credible lead suggested that whatever had happened to the two women, it had occurred in a way that left no trace discoverable by conventional search methods. The families refused to accept that their daughters might never be found. They continued to organize search efforts, consult with experts, and pursue any lead that might provide answers. Their determination kept the case alive in the public consciousness and ensured that law enforcement continued to dedicate resources to the investigation. The 5th anniversary of the disappearance brought renewed media attention to the case. Several true crime podcasts featured the story, and a documentary film crew spent several weeks in the area, interviewing family members, investigators, and local residents. The increased coverage generated new tips and theories, but none led to any breakthrough in the investigation. One theory that gained traction was that the women had encountered drug smugglers or other criminals who used the remote canyon system as a transit route or hiding place. The area's isolation and proximity to major transportation corridors made it potentially attractive for illegal activities, and investigators looked into reports of unusual activity in the region. However, this theory was difficult to investigate because of the area's remoteness and the complete lack of physical evidence. Drug enforcement agencies had no record of significant activity in the canyon system, and local law enforcement had received no reports of suspicious behavior in the area around the time of the disappearance. Another theory suggested that the women had suffered some kind of accident that left them unable to return to their base camp. The challenging terrain and numerous cliff faces presented opportunities for falls or other injuries that could have proven fatal. However, extensive search efforts had covered all the accessible areas where such an accident might have occurred, and no trace of the women or their equipment had been found. The investigation also considered the possibility that the women had deliberately disappeared, perhaps to escape some unknown problem or to start new lives elsewhere. This theory was quickly dismissed by investigators who knew them well. Both women had strong family relationships, successful academic careers, and no known financial or personal problems that would have motivated them to fake their own disappearances. As the years passed, the case became one of those enduring mysteries that captured the imagination of amateur investigators and true crime enthusiasts. Online forums dedicated to missing persons cases featured extensive discussions about possible explanations for the disappearance, with armchair detectives proposing theories ranging from the plausible to the bizarre. The families appreciated the continued public interest in the case, but they also found it emotionally challenging to see their daughters' lives reduced to internet speculation and conspiracy theories. They worked with law enforcement to ensure that credible tips continued to be investigated while trying to maintain some privacy and dignity in their ongoing grief. The investigation files grew thicker over the years, filled with witness statements, search reports, and follow-up investigations on dozens of tips and leads. Detective Maria Santos, who had been assigned to the case from the beginning, became an expert on every detail of the disappearance and the subsequent investigation. Detective Santos had interviewed hundreds of people over the years, from family members and friends to complete strangers who claimed to have information about the case. She had supervised search efforts covering thousands of acres of desert terrain and had coordinated with multiple agencies and organizations in the hope of finding some trace of the missing women. The detective's dedication to the case was personal, as well as professional. She had a daughter about the same age as Melissa and Emma, and she understood the family's need for answers and closure. She promised them that the investigation would continue as long as there was any hope of solving the case, and she kept that promise even as other priorities demanded her attention. The 7th anniversary of the disappearance passed with little fanfare, marking another year without answers or resolution. The families held their annual memorial service, attended by a smaller group of friends and supporters as public attention continued to fade. The case remained open, but the active investigation had been scaled back to responding to tips and following up on occasional leads. It was around this time that the canyon system began to attract attention from a different community. Cave exploration enthusiasts, known as spelunkers, had discovered references to the area in geological surveys that suggested the presence of unmapped cave systems and underground passages. The same geological processes that had created the cliff dwellings and alcoves had also formed extensive cave networks beneath the desert floor. The Arizona Cave Conservancy, a group dedicated to mapping and protecting the state's cave systems, had identified the canyon area as potentially significant for speleological research. The organization was comprised of experienced cavers who combined their passion for underground exploration with scientific research and conservation efforts. Dr. Michael Rodriguez, a geologist and experienced caver who led the Conservancy's mapping efforts, had been intrigued by geological formations visible in satellite images of the canyon system. The images showed what appeared to be sinkholes and other features that suggested the presence of extensive underground cave networks. The Conservancy's initial survey of the area confirmed Dr. Rodriguez's suspicions. The canyon system was honeycombed with caves and passages, some of which appeared to extend for miles beneath the desert floor. The caves showed evidence of formation over millions of years, with complex systems of chambers, passages, and underground streams that created a hidden world beneath the surface. The discovery of the cave systems added a new dimension to the ongoing mystery of Melissa and Emma's disappearance. Investigators had focused their search efforts on the surface terrain, but the presence of extensive underground networks suggested that the women might have encountered cave entrances or fallen into hidden openings that hadn't been discovered by search teams. Dr. Rodriguez and his team began a systematic mapping project, using modern cave surveying techniques to document the extent and characteristics of the underground systems. The work was challenging and time-consuming, requiring specialized equipment and expertise to navigate the complex underground terrain safely. The cave mapping project took place over several years, with teams of volunteers spending weekends and vacation time exploring and documenting the underground networks. The work revealed a cave system that was far more extensive than anyone had anticipated, with multiple levels and interconnected passages that created a three-dimensional maze beneath the desert floor. The cavers made numerous discoveries during their exploration, including underground chambers with remarkable geological formations, underground streams that disappeared into impenetrable passages, and evidence of prehistoric use of some of the larger caves. The archaeological evidence suggested that ancient peoples had used some of the caves for shelter, storage, and possibly ceremonial purposes. The mapping project also revealed several cave entrances that weren't visible from the surface, hidden beneath rock falls or concealed by vegetation. These discoveries raised new questions about whether Melissa and Emma might have encountered one of these hidden entrances and become lost in the underground system. Detective Santos worked closely with the cave exploration team, sharing information about the missing women case and asking the cavers to be alert for any signs of human presence in the underground systems. The detective understood that the caves presented both an opportunity and a challenge for the investigation, offering new areas to search, but also presenting extremely difficult and dangerous conditions for search efforts. The cavers took their role in the investigation seriously, documenting everything they found and reporting any unusual discoveries to law enforcement. They were experienced in underground search and rescue techniques, but they also understood the limitations of searching such an extensive and complex system. As the cave mapping project progressed, it became clear that a complete exploration of the system would take many years and require significant resources. The network of caves and passages extended far beyond the immediate area where Melissa and Emma had disappeared, reaching into adjacent canyon systems and possibly connecting to other known cave networks in the region. The 8th anniversary of the disappearance brought a surprise development. A team of cavers exploring a previously unmapped section of the cave system discovered a chamber that contained modern debris, including what appeared to be pieces of camping equipment and photography gear. The discovery was immediately reported to law enforcement, and the area was secured as a potential crime scene. Detective Santos rappelled into the cave system with a forensic team to examine the discovery. The chamber was large and accessible, with multiple passages leading to other parts of the underground network. The debris was scattered across the chamber floor, partially buried by sediment and organic material that had accumulated over years of seasonal flooding. The forensic examination revealed that the debris included pieces of camera equipment, clothing, fragments, and camping gear that appeared to be consistent with the equipment that Melissa and Emma had been carrying. However, the items were degraded and fragmented, making positive identification difficult. The discovery energized the investigation and brought renewed hope to the families. For the first time in 8 years, there was physical evidence that might be connected to the missing women. The forensic team worked carefully to document and collect every piece of potential evidence, while cavers mapped the chamber and its connections to other parts of the underground system. The evidence was sent to the FBI's forensic laboratories for detailed analysis. The Bureau's experts used advanced techniques to examine the degraded materials, looking for any traces of DNA, fingerprints, or other identifying characteristics that might confirm a connection to the missing women. The analysis took several months, but the results were disappointing. The degraded condition of the evidence made it impossible to establish a definitive connection to Melissa and Emma. While the equipment appeared to be consistent with what they had been carrying, it could not be conclusively identified as belonging to them. The discovery did provide new leads for the investigation. The location of the chamber and its connections to other parts of the cave system suggested possible routes that someone might have taken to reach the underground area. The forensic team also found evidence that the chamber had been used by humans in the recent past, with traces of campfires and food remains that suggested temporary habitation. Detective Santos expanded the investigation to include a more thorough exploration of the cave system, working with experienced cavers to search other chambers and passages for additional evidence. The work was slow and methodical, requiring careful attention to safety protocols and documentation of every discovery. The cave exploration revealed that the underground system was even more complex than initially thought. Multiple levels of passages connected chambers of various sizes, with some areas requiring technical climbing skills to navigate safely. The system included underground streams, water-filled passages, and chambers that were only accessible during certain seasons when water levels were low. The complexity of the system raised new questions about what might have happened to Melissa and Emma. If they had encountered a cave entrance while exploring the surface terrain, they might have entered the underground system either accidentally or deliberately. However, the challenging conditions and maze-like layout of the caves would have made it extremely difficult for inexperienced cavers to find their way back to the surface. The families were grateful for the renewed investigation efforts, but they also found the uncertainty emotionally challenging. The discovery of possible evidence had raised hopes that were then dashed by the inconclusive forensic results. They continued to support the investigation while trying to manage their expectations about what might be discovered. The 9th anniversary of the disappearance marked a turning point in the investigation. Dr. Rodriguez and his cave exploration team had made a breakthrough in their mapping efforts, discovering a previously unknown section of the cave system that was accessible through a hidden entrance in a remote part of the canyon. The entrance was concealed behind a rock fall that appeared to be natural but had been carefully arranged to hide the opening. The discovery was significant because it suggested that someone had deliberately concealed the entrance, possibly to prevent discovery of whatever lay beyond. Dr. Rodriguez and his team documented the concealed entrance carefully before removing the rocks to gain access to the passage beyond. The work was done in coordination with Detective Santos and her forensic team, with every step photographed and documented as potential evidence. The passage beyond the concealed entrance led to a chamber that was unlike anything the cavers had discovered in the system. The chamber was large and appeared to have been modified by human activity, with carved shelves and storage areas that suggested long-term use. The floor of the chamber was covered with a layer of sand and debris that had accumulated over many years. The chamber also contained clear evidence of recent human activity. The cavers discovered the remains of cooking fires, food containers, and camping equipment that appeared to be much more recent than the prehistoric artifacts found in other parts of the cave system. The evidence suggested that someone had been using the chamber as a base of operations for extended periods. Detective Santos and her forensic team conducted a thorough examination of the chamber, documenting everything they found and collecting samples for laboratory analysis. The evidence suggested that the chamber had been used regularly over several years, with multiple layers of debris indicating repeated occupation. The discovery of the concealed chamber and evidence of its recent use transformed the investigation. For the first time, there was clear evidence that someone had been operating in the canyon system during the time period when Melissa and Emma disappeared. The concealed entrance and modified chamber suggested a level of organization and planning that indicated deliberate criminal activity. The forensic analysis of evidence from the chamber revealed traces of materials that were consistent with archaeological artifacts, including pottery fragments and stone tools that appeared to be of prehistoric origin. The discovery suggested that the chamber might have been used for storing or processing stolen archaeological materials. This revelation opened up an entirely new line of investigation. Detective Santos began looking into reports of archaeological theft and artifact smuggling in the region, consulting with experts from the FBI's Art Crime Team and the National Park Service's Archaeological Protection Unit. The investigation revealed that the southwestern United States had experienced a significant increase in archaeological theft and artifact smuggling in recent years. The high value of prehistoric artifacts on the black market had created incentives for criminals to loot archaeological sites on public lands, often causing irreparable damage to scientifically significant locations. The canyon system where Melissa and Emma had disappeared was particularly vulnerable to this type of criminal activity. The remote location and presence of well-preserved archaeological sites made it an attractive target for artifact thieves, while the difficult terrain and lack of regular patrols made it unlikely that illegal activities would be detected. Detective Santos worked with federal agencies to investigate known artifact smuggling networks and identify individuals who might have been operating in the canyon area. The investigation revealed that several organized groups had been active in the region, using remote locations as bases for looting operations that targeted archaeological sites across the Southwest. The investigation also revealed connections between local individuals and national artifact smuggling networks. Several people with ties to the area had been investigated for archaeological crimes, though none had been definitively linked to activities in the specific canyon system where Melissa and Emma had disappeared. As the investigation expanded, Detective Santos began to develop a theory about what might have happened to the missing women. If they had encountered artifact smugglers while exploring the canyon system, they might have been seen as a threat to the illegal operation. Their photography equipment and documentation activities would have made them particularly dangerous. To criminals who needed to keep their activities secret, the theory was compelling, but proving it would require finding additional evidence that directly connected the artifact smuggling operation to the disappearance. The investigation team began focusing on the cave system and the concealed chamber, looking for any traces of Melissa and Emma or their equipment. The search of the cave system intensified, with teams of cavers and investigators working together to explore every accessible passage and chamber. The work was dangerous and time-consuming, requiring specialized equipment and expertise to navigate the complex underground terrain safely. The expanded search revealed additional evidence of criminal activity in the cave system. Multiple chambers showed signs of recent use, with evidence of storage areas, workshop spaces, and living quarters that suggested a sophisticated operation. The criminals had been using the cave system as a base for their activities, taking advantage of the natural concealment and security provided by the underground environment. The investigation also revealed that the cave system had been modified to make it more suitable for criminal activities. Passages had been widened to allow easier movement of materials. Chambers had been equipped with artificial lighting and ventilation systems, and storage areas had been constructed to protect valuable artifacts from moisture and temperature fluctuations. The level of modification and organization suggested that the criminal operation had been active for several years, possibly predating Melissa and Emma's disappearance by a significant period. The criminals had invested considerable time and resources in establishing their base of operations, indicating that they were involved in a large-scale and profitable enterprise. As the investigation continued, Detective Santos began to identify individuals who might have been involved in the operation. The investigation revealed connections between several local residents and known artifact smuggling networks, including people who had the knowledge and resources necessary to establish and operate the cave-based criminal enterprise. The investigation also revealed that the criminal operation had been sophisticated in its approach to security and concealment. The criminals had taken extensive measures to prevent discovery, including the use of lookouts, communication systems, and carefully planned routes for moving materials in and out of the cave system. The security measures suggested that the criminals were aware of the risk of discovery and had taken steps to protect their operation from law enforcement and other threats. This raised questions about how they might have responded to the accidental discovery of their activities by two amateur archaeologists with cameras. The 10th anniversary of Melissa and Emma's disappearance approached with the investigation more active than it had been in years. The discovery of the cave system and evidence of criminal activity had provided new leads and theories, but the case remained unsolved. The families continued to hope for answers while supporting the expanded investigation efforts. Detective Santos had assembled a team of investigators, federal agents, and expert consultants to work on the case. The team included specialists in archaeological crime, cave exploration, forensic analysis, and criminal psychology. The multidisciplinary approach reflected the complexity of the case and the various types of evidence that had been discovered. The investigation team had developed a comprehensive theory about what might have happened to Melissa and Emma. The theory suggested that the women had encountered the artifact smuggling operation while exploring the canyon system, possibly discovering evidence of illegal activities or stumbling upon one of the concealed entrances to the cave system. According to the theory, the criminals had viewed the women as a threat to their operation and had taken action to prevent them from reporting what they had discovered. The women's photography equipment and documentation activities would have made them particularly dangerous to the criminals, who needed to maintain absolute secrecy about their activities. The theory was consistent with the evidence that had been discovered, including the concealed chamber, the evidence of criminal activity, and the complete disappearance of the women and their equipment. However, proving the theory would require finding direct evidence of what had happened to Melissa and Emma. The investigation team decided to focus their efforts on the most recently discovered areas of the cave system, particularly the chambers, that showed the most evidence of recent criminal activity. The team believed that if the women had been killed because of their discovery of the operation, their bodies might have been concealed somewhere in the cave system. The search efforts were coordinated with the ongoing cave mapping project, with teams of cavers and investigators working together to explore every accessible area of the underground network. The work was methodical and painstaking, requiring careful attention to safety protocols and documentation of every discovery. The search teams used advanced equipment, including ground-penetrating radar, metal detectors, and chemical analysis tools to look for any traces of human remains or equipment. The challenging conditions in the cave system made the work slow and difficult, but the teams were motivated by the possibility of finally solving the decade-old mystery. As the teams worked their way through the cave system, they continued to discover evidence of the criminal operation. The scale and sophistication of the enterprise became clearer with each new discovery, revealing a network of chambers, passages, and storage areas that had been used for processing and storing stolen archaeological materials. The investigation also revealed that the criminal operation had connections to a network of dealers and collectors who specialized in prehistoric artifacts from the southwestern United States. The criminals had been supplying high-value items to collectors who were willing to pay premium prices for rare and historically significant pieces. The network included individuals from across the country, including collectors, dealers, and intermediaries, who helped facilitate the illegal trade in stolen artifacts. The investigation revealed that the operation had been generating significant profits, with some individual pieces selling for tens of thousands of dollars on the black market. The financial incentives for the criminal operation were substantial, providing clear motivation for the criminals to protect their activities from discovery. The investigation team understood that the criminals would have been willing to take extreme measures to prevent their operation from being exposed, including potentially violent action against anyone who threatened their security. As the investigation approached its 11th year, the search teams made their most significant discovery yet. Deep in a previously unexplored section of the cave system, they found a chamber that contained clear evidence of recent human activity, including personal belongings and equipment that appeared to be consistent with what Melissa and Emma had been carrying. The chamber was hidden behind a complex series of passages that would have been extremely difficult for inexperienced cavers to navigate. The location suggested that whoever had brought the materials to this chamber had intimate knowledge of the cave system and had deliberately chosen a location that would be difficult to discover. The forensic team conducted a careful examination of the chamber and its contents, documenting every detail and collecting samples for laboratory analysis. The evidence included fragments of camera equipment, clothing, and personal items that appeared to be consistent with the missing women's belongings. The discovery represented a potential breakthrough in the case, but the investigation team was careful not to jump to conclusions. The evidence would need to be analyzed thoroughly before any definitive connections could be established. The families were informed of the discovery, but were asked to remain patient while the analysis was completed. The forensic analysis took several months, but the results were more conclusive than previous discoveries. DNA analysis confirmed that some of the personal items had belonged to Melissa and Emma, providing the first definitive evidence of their fate in over a decade. The discovery confirmed that the women had indeed encountered the criminal operation and had been killed because of what they had discovered. The evidence suggested that their bodies had been concealed in the cave system, but the exact location remained unclear. The investigation team prepared for the most challenging phase of their work, searching for the final evidence that would solve the case completely. The search for the final evidence required exploring the most remote and dangerous sections of the cave system. The teams worked carefully, using all available technology and expertise to examine areas that had never been fully explored. The work was dangerous and emotionally challenging, but the investigators were determined to find the answers that the families had been seeking for so long. After weeks of intensive searching, the investigation team finally made the discovery that would solve the case. In a hidden chamber deep in the cave system, they found the remains of Melissa Morrison and Emma Brown, along with their camera equipment and the photographs that revealed the shocking truth about what they had discovered in October 2003. The final photographs on their cameras showed them documenting what appeared to be a sophisticated artifact smuggling operation, with images of stolen pottery, ceremonial objects, and other priceless archaeological materials being processed and prepared for shipment. The photographs also showed individuals who appeared to be involved in the criminal operation, providing crucial evidence for the prosecution of those responsible. The discovery of the women's remains and the photographic evidence they had died to protect finally provided the answers that their families had been seeking for 11 years. The evidence revealed that Melissa and Emma had been killed because they had accidentally documented a criminal operation that had been looting archaeological sites across the Southwest for over a decade. The investigation that followed the discovery led to the arrest and prosecution of several individuals involved in the artifact smuggling operation, including the operations leader, a respected local museum curator who had been using his position and expertise to facilitate the theft and sale of priceless archaeological materials. The prosecution resulted in significant prison sentences for the criminals and the recovery of millions of dollars worth of stolen artifacts. The resolution of the case brought closure to the families of Melissa Morrison and Emma Brown, while also exposing and shutting down one of the most sophisticated archaeological theft operations in the history of the American Southwest. The women's dedication to documenting and protecting archaeological sites had ultimately led to the preservation of countless irreplaceable artifacts and the prosecution of those who had sought to profit from the destruction of America's cultural heritage. The case serves as a reminder of the dangers faced by those who work to protect archaeological sites and cultural resources, while also demonstrating the importance of their work in preserving the heritage of ancient peoples for future generations. Melissa and Emma's legacy lives on through the scholarship fund established in their names and the continued work of archaeologists and conservationists who share their passion for protecting the past.